First of all, a gospel quote here to put some context into what the topic of the theme of the talk today. Matthew chapter 23, verse 2. The scribes and Pharisees have taken their seat on the chair of Moses. Therefore, do and observe all things whatsoever they tell you, but do not follow their example. So, and speaking about certain things, you realize, you know what? The example to follow is Jesus, not necessarily the one who is sitting in the chair of Moses, right? So what is our theme? The theme is interior life. Jesus is always the best example when it comes to prayer, right? And so, I speak to you, but I also speak to myself. So, the interior life. First of all, what is the interior life? Like, if you had to give a definition, think to yourself, what would my definition be of the interior life? We might have a lot of ideas, right, about what the interior life is, and they're mostly probably right. For example, St. Paul, right? Galatians 2:20, right? I live no longer I, but Christ lives in me. That's a pretty good definition, right? Usually Scripture gives pretty good definitions on things. No longer I live, but Christ lives in me. Interior life. So in me, Jesus lives. Interior life. What is the princeps analogatum of life, right? That's that philosophical term. What is of all the meanings of life, what is the main one, right? A plant lives, right? Human beings live, animals live, they have life, but there's different degrees, there's different types of life. And what is the top type of life, way of life, is Jesus. He is the life. He defined himself as the life. So there's no greater definition of interior life than Jesus living in me. St. Paul, right? Great definition. Another great definition from this book, which is my favorite book, The Soul of the Apostolate, gives a great definition on the interior life. And if you can get past some of the, I don't want to say, maybe antiquated. I don't know if I want to say antiquated because it's beautiful, but the language that we're not used to, right? If you can get past that, there's a lot of treasures in this book. And it says here near the beginning, it speaks about interior life, right? This whole book is basically interior life. And he says, after some explanation, you don't have to write this down. It's on page 13. Later you can look it up, right? So don't worry about writing it all down. He defines interior life as, this is kind of academic, the state of activity of a soul which strives against its natural inclinations in order to regulate them. Okay, so first part, a state of activity. So it's an action, right? It's not passive. It's an active thing. Striving to regulate these natural inclinations, right? The things I'm naturally inclined to do. Against that, right? So it's already saying these natural inclinations, right? The bad ones, right? Bad natural inclinations. We shouldn't strive against good natural inclinations, right? So those negative inclinations, so that we can regulate them. Okay, so that's the first part. And endeavors to acquire the habit of judging and directing its movements, right? Those inspirations, my feelings, emotions, thoughts, everything. Those movements, to judge and direct them in all things according to the light of the gospel and the example of our Lord. Right? What would Jesus do? The life of Jesus in me. So it's kind of this, he goes on to explain it, right? It's this detachment from creatures, you could say, in that classical language, right? Detachment from things, detachment from my old way of doing things, the old man, those bad inclinations, right? Seeking, what are my bad inclinations, right? Laziness, selfishness, seeking myself, my own comfort above others, all those negative inclinations, right? Those things that are basically inclined to myself, right? Striving against that, all those attachments to myself. And then attaching myself to God, right? What would Jesus do? Thinking like him, putting on the mind of Christ, right? That's the definition that he provides here. Dom Chautard, however you say his name. His definition of interior life is that working against those natural inclinations to try to put on the mind of Jesus, basically. So, this is opposed interior life. Sometimes it helps when defining something, right? What is it? What is it not? Right? Okay. So that's what it is. Oftentimes they'll first talk about what it isn't, and then they'll say what it is. But I just did the opposite here. So, when you hear exterior life, what do you think about? Someone who is just constantly, online, for example, social media. That's a great example, right? Or the news all the time. What's happening in the world? Sports, what's happening in sports, like all the time. You're thinking about that. Your studies, right? I'm sure most of you, that's like your big distraction. You're always, how can I study more? How can I study better? What is this? This artist is just, so passionate about. I just want to learn more about him. So I'm always thinking about him. That's a common occurrence with humanists, right? So where do your thoughts tend? What do you think about? That's a great conscience examine question, right? What did I think about this morning? It's very simple and very effective. This morning I was thinking about X. This afternoon I was thinking about Y the whole time, right? That was where my thoughts were directed. Where your heart is, there will your treasure be, right? And that's a great indicator, a measurement, a thermometer of interior life. What was I thinking about? Was I thinking about Jesus? The glory of God, salvation of souls? Is that where my thoughts were tending? Usually my conscience examines, I'm realizing, actually no, it's not where my thoughts were tending. In some things they were, but not purely, right? And that's pretty normal, right? We're not Jesus or Mary. We sin. Therefore, we don't think about his glory. We don't think about him all the time, right? We have this exterior life viewed, seen in the negative sense. The news isn't bad, right? Sports isn't bad. Studies aren't bad, right? But it's the disproportionate nature of it that's bad, right? So exterior life, interior life. So interior and exterior, they're both important, right? Classic Mary Martha, right? Both important. Okay, we need both. That's good. Yes, true. And you can think about it that there's vertical and there's a horizontal aspect, right? The vertical aspect, my relationship with God, and then the horizontal with my fellow brothers, right? With men, with this world, the vertical and the horizontal. And they're both important, right? I was looking up an example, and this image came to my mind of, those tightrope walkers. So in 2015, Freddie Knock, he got this record for the highest tightrope walk, which was, ground supported. So meaning between two mountains, basically. It's not between buildings, between two mountains. It was about 1 kilometer up in the air, right? So with no support or safety, he just had this long pole, right? Walking across these two mountain peaks in the Swiss Alps, right? And, I suppose, to make my example fit even better, right? The higher up you are, the longer, you need the pole to be, because they have these big, huge balancing poles. And the longer they are, the less that the winds, will affect you. It kind of helps keep you balanced, right? If he tried to do that without any kind of balancing pole, it would not be a pretty sight, right? It probably would not have made it, especially up there. So you need the horizontal aspect. Otherwise, the vertical aspect is dangerous, right? And that's what this whole balance between interior life and exterior life, you could say. So love for God, love for man. And that was great this morning, right? We had I didn't hear the homily, so I don't know. I hope I'm not repeating anything here. Because I was worried about this talk, so I was preparing it, this morning. I mean, the last final touches, it's like an exam, right? You've studied well, you've prepared well, right? But it's amazing how that last, half hour before the exam, you just learn so much, At least that's my experience. So, right, just the finishing touches, wow, all these lights all of a sudden coming. So in the readings this morning, right, you have the prophet Isaiah, first reading, chapter 58. How does he start off? Share your bread with the hungry. Shelter the oppressed and the homeless. Clothe the naked. So the Beatitudes, right? Works of mercy, right? Focus on other people. The horizontal aspect, right? It's not like it's bad and you kind of just need to deal. No, it's essential. That's what he's saying here. Love for others, right? It's essential. And he says, right, if you do this, right, then you shall call and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help and he will say, here I am. Right, so that correct relationship, right, with others is essential for our correct relationship with God, right? And this is a little, maybe parentheses, well, not parentheses, no, this is an important part of the talk too, but, brotherhood, one of the three kind of catchphrases, themes of our, kind of the vision of Cheshire, right? Brotherhood, adventure, mission. Brotherhood, right? It can only be understood and lived well when you have the vertical and the horizontal correctly, there's a good proportion between the two, right? So just imagine a cross, right, with a short, vertical beam and a wide, it would look very funny, right? And it wouldn't work, right? Actually, if you think about it, there wouldn't be any suffering because you'd stand there, you wouldn't be hanging, right? Because it'd be really short. Okay, I don't know if that helps, but all right. So compare that image, right, of the disproportionate cross, right? That just doesn't work. The vertical part needs to be a little taller, right, than the horizontal part. But you need both, right? You wouldn't. A cross doesn't work if it's just a vertical beam either, right? And it wouldn't be balanced; it would fall over. Okay, I'm stretching this image kind of to its limits there, right? But there needs to be that correct proportion, right? Relationship with God, relationship with others. So so what does that mean in brotherhood, right? From both directions. If your prayer, right, if your vertical relationship, your prayer leads you to a greater love for your brothers, then it's a good prayer. It's an indicator of good prayer. Right? If it leads you to serve, to forget about yourself, to notice that somebody needs you when you go out of yourself. Right? If your prayer leads to those things, it's a good prayer. Now, what's a danger? There's this other great book, The Spiritual Doctrine of Father Louis Valmont, and he talks about prayer, among many other things. He was a novice master. like 5 years after St. Isaac Jogues. I looked it up because I thought he was the novice director of St. Isaac Jogues, but he was 5 years after. So about the same time as St. Isaac Jogues, St. John de Brebeuf, right? We're in Canada there, and northern United States also. So he says so we're talking here about this prayer spilling forth into good works, charity towards others, right? He says, it is an error in prayer to constrain ourselves to give it always a practical bearing. Okay, what does he mean by that? So it's wrong if in our prayer, at the end, we say, okay, like sometimes our prayer will end in very concrete, like this is I need to do this today. And that can be very helpful, right? That's not bad. But it's an error to say always, for the rest of my life, at the end of every prayer, I'm going to come up with a concrete resolution, and I need to fulfill that, and if I don't, it's bad, right? And if my prayer doesn't have this concrete resolution, then it's a bad prayer, right? He's saying, no, that's wrong. See, right? That can be a very good thing and a very helpful thing. But we don't need to always think in my prayer, I have to end up with this, always, right? And he continues. He gives reasons for it. He says, we excite and disquiet ourselves in resolving how we shall behave on such and such occasion. What acts of humility, for example, we should practice. And then he says, right, not that it is not well to do this when we pray. Okay, it's a good thing. To foresee occasions and prepare ourselves for them. Okay, that's good. But it should be done with freedom of mind, without refusing to yield ourselves to the simple recollection of contemplation when we feel ourselves drawn to it. So if you're just having like one of those meditations where you're just in the zone, right? And you're just like, this is great. Lord, it is good that I am here, right? I want to build a tent and just stay here forever, right? That is a good prayer. And you don't need to shake yourself out of it. Okay, now I need to come up with my concrete resolution, right? Because in that moment, that is like the goal of prayer. Why would you stop that? That's like the whole point of it, right? Oh, I got to stop that. No, that's like you're in the zone. Like that's it, right? Because why is that? Because in that, Jesus is like infusing virtue into you, right? You're connected to the life itself, right? Don't cut yourself off from that. You're connected to the vine, right? With 100 gigabyte connection, just flowing right through you. And that produces goodness, and it will produce charity towards others. You don't need to force it. It'll happen, right? So that's a good measuring stick for your prayer, right? Is it overflowing into charity and good works towards my brothers, towards helpfulness, towards encouragement, towards good example, right? Towards inspiring my brothers to be faithful, right? And also in the other direction, right? A correct relationship with my brothers, if it is a good one, should lead me to greater love of God and a greater fidelity in relationship with God, right? So a good thermometer of true brotherhood, right? We say brotherhood, yeah, brotherhood. But there's good and there's bad brotherhood, right? So what is the best? How can I be the best brother, right? And that's the thermometer. Does this relationship with my brother, does it lead me to greater love of God? Right? Does it lead me to greater fidelity? Right? Greater holiness? Does it inspire me to make more visits to the Eucharist? Right? To be sincere and open with my superiors? Right? To be silent when I need to be silent? Right, all those things. There's just fidelity, the day-to-day fidelity, the hard fidelity, right? Does my brotherhood, does it lead me to that? And guess what? We're complicated. there's parts of our brotherhood which probably leads to greater fidelity, and there's part of it which probably doesn't, right? That's normal, that's natural, right? We're human beings, we're not angels. But it's a helpful kind of measuring stick, right? Okay, well, these things can be purified. These things are helpful, right? And we usually live in a mix of all of that. Some objections to the interior life, right? It's a classic kind of, St. Thomas Aquinas in his Numbers, he will start off with objections. Some say this, some say that, some say the other thing. Like, well, here's the general question, okay? Some say this, some say that. Is the interior life good, right, for example? That would be the question. Well, there's some objections that he first puts forward, okay? And there are some objections here in this book, The Soul of the Apostolate. First objection, and actually I'm going to add my own objection, which isn't in this book. So the first one, is the interior life lazy, right? You think, interior life, prayer, etc., like a life lived, it seems like it's kind of lazy, like you're not doing a whole lot. You're avoiding work because I'm an interior man, right? So those things, you can take care of those things. I need to go pray, right? First of all, that's wrong, right? But that idea of, is it lazy? And he gives a great example here. This is a Trappist monk, Dom Sebastian, I suppose is how you would say it in French. And you might have heard this kind of comparison before, but he breaks work down into kind of 3 levels, right? So he has the first level of work or activity is the almost exclusively physical work of those who live by manual labor, right? Like the workers in the field, working hard, sweating. And he says that this is the easiest of the 3, right? I think, at least personally in my experience, that's very true. Sometimes it's just easier to go out and to chop some wood, right? Not that I do that much. Or sweep the hallway, mop the floor. It takes physical effort, but as far as the mind is concerned, it's super easy, right? It's just put the dirt into the thing, right? Put the mop on the thing, dry it, right? Really easy. Right? I mean, maybe it requires some physical effort, but sometimes that's much more preferable and easier and lazy than the further steps, the second level. What's the second level? The intellectual toil of the scholar, the thinker in his often arduous pursuit of truth, that of the writer, of the professor, right? Who puts everything they know, everything they have into the effort to communicate, right? So this is very difficult, and also in my own flesh have experienced that, especially in Rome. I remember, I don't know why I remember it more, but all morning you're in classes. I suppose the same was when I was here. But you get to lunchtime and you're just so hungry. There's something about the intellectual effort that uses up lots of energy. And I just remember getting to that bowl of pasta in Rome and just, I could eat the whole thing. And there was so much pasta that I could without feeling bad. So I've experienced that in myself, right? And then the third level, obviously, right, saw it coming already. There's the labor of the interior life. And he did not hesitate to declare that of the 3, this kind, when it is taken seriously, is by far the most exacting, right? The most difficult, the most trying, right? We'd much rather, right, sweep the hallway than study, but sometimes we'd much rather also study than go and do an hour of meditation, right? The hard work that's involved in that. It's very difficult. So lazy? I find it hard to call the interior life lazy, right? It's probably the most difficult, the most arduous of the types of life, right? Then he gives a second objection. Is the interior life selfish, right? And that kind of goes back to what I touched on before, right? I know I'm a man of prayer. All those other things I don't get involved in because this is, my prayer time and just focused on myself, right? Selfishness. And that can be an objection, right? To be a man of interior life, there's so many problems out there in the world. Like, what are you doing thinking about yourself in your little interior life? Like, go out and help people. The world is dying for lack of Christ, and you're just sitting here in your little chapel and praying by yourself. Come on, get out there, let's go, right? Selfishness, you selfish person, right? And then he has a great response to this. Was the interior life of Mary and Joseph selfish? What blasphemy and what absurdity. And yet they are credited with not one external work. The mere influence upon the world of an intense inner life, the merits of prayers and sacrifices applied for the spread of the benefits of the redemption were enough to make Mary queen of the apostles and Joseph patron of the universal church. Selfish? I don't think so. So, interior life is not lazy. The interior life is not selfish. And then, this is where I'm kind of going off the cuff here into my own speculation, but my objection to the interior life, even more than those, is the interior life sad? Is it lonely? Right? Seems like it is. Seems kind of boring. Sad, boring. Right? I think in our time, in our world, in our culture, we equate quietness with sadness, right? Silence is boring and sad and serious, right? If we're going to be silent, we have to walk around the house with our heads down, right? Focused 7 tiles ahead of us, right? Always walking around, right? Oblivious to any, floating across the hallways, just silent, right? Quiet. And this is what we can think of when we think of the interior life, and this is how it's supposed to be lived, right? This false image that we can create within ourselves. Therefore we say, therefore it must be bad. My brother's quiet. I need to go shake things up, right? I need to go say that joke at this moment, right? Create a conversation in front of the board, right? People are quiet. Come on, let's go. We got to be joyful and happy because quiet is sad, right? And serious, right? And we can act on those assumptions. And I think what it really kind of essentially kind of comes down to, is we think that quietness means emptiness, right? And that would be a bad thing. That is a bad thing. Emptiness is not a good thing, right? So we equate silence, quietness, therefore there's just kind of this emptiness inside. And so you want to fill it with some joy, right? Because it seems like that means emptiness. But actually, okay, well that is possible, but that's not the reason for silence, right? It's the opposite. The reason for it is fullness, is to be filled with God, right? And think of any of the saints, put any saint there in the blank. Just think how Mary and Joseph, going back to them, right? Not even one word, right? It said here, not one work, external work is attributed to Joseph. Not even one word is attributed to Joseph, right? And yet, how powerful his apostolate for the salvation of humanity, right? To be the dad of Jesus. I mean, that's a pretty awesome apostolate, right? That the quietness of the Holy Family, right? The quietness of Jesus' life for 30 years, was it just sad and serious? No, I think it was full of incredible joy, right? Filled with God. And that it's hard. It's hard to do that. because we're coming from a world that is very much against that whole idea. Right? And that's why, one of you will be very happy about this, but that's why Cheshire is so important to the world. Right? Because here you're learning to live that interior life, that interior peace that is transformative, right? Transformation into Christ. You have there, humanist, right, in your stairwell. That's what we're going for. The life of Jesus in me, right? Not I. Okay, so there is an emptying there, but it's so that it might be filled with the life of Jesus. That's the interior life. It's an absolutely full, overflowing life. There's not emptiness there. And this is the great thing about Cheshire. This is the great thing about a religious, right? Someone who's dedicated full time, right? Our full-time job, our career, is to be a Jesus lover, right? That's my job. Full-time for Christ. Full life. That's our job, right? Isn't it great?